Good morning, everyone. Let's give it up for Wendy Indy. That was amazing. If you are not following her on Instagram, her handle is Wendy Indy Music. She's a talent from Chicago, I'm just saying, okay? How's everyone feeling this morning? Good? The café con leche is starting to kick in. We want to welcome our virtual audience. We have an exciting day of programming, including our closing ceremony at the Shell. Next up is a conversation that goes deep on something we all care about, making sure that higher education delivers real outcomes. Please join me in welcoming Ted Mitchell, President of the American Council on Education, and Tim Knowles, President of the Carnegie Foundation, for this important fireside chat.
Good morning.
Morning,
thank you for being here bright and early. And Ted, thank you for being here bright and early.
Tim, thank you.
For those of you who don't know, Ted is spending more time with the media than he is with his family. So I consider it a privilege that you would join me this morning. So I'm going to plunge in and give a point of view about where we are contextually in terms of the state of higher education, which is a risky thing to do at the moment. And then I'm going to turn it to you, and you can do the same.
Deal.
The question is whether this is a Dickensian moment or an existential moment. And I'm going to argue for the Dickensian side, that it is both the worst of times and best of times. And the indicators that it's troubling aren't just because the federal government is making enormous cuts to higher education, or there are not simply because there's broadsides to elite institutions every week. Yesterday, Northwestern and Cornell were in the crosshairs. But before the election, there were real indications of deep challenges for higher ed. There's precipitous drops in public confidence. Clearly, the $1.7 trillion in student debt, affordability, access. There's a demographic cliff that some of you may have heard about. There's fewer 18-year-olds expected to enter, fewer 18-year-olds in general, and this could be seriously exacerbated by international students electing not to come to these shores to learn. So why do I think there's hope in the unseen? I think precisely because of the threats, because of the exogenous factors that are pressuring higher education. This is actually a moment for transformation, and we've seen this in sectors across the board. When under this kind of pressure, they have to ask themselves, what next, and pivot, whether it's incumbent institutions or new entrants. So I think there is an opportunity for us to focus on outcomes and not inputs in this sector. Ted, what do you think?
So I'm going to end up in the same place, but I'm going to start with existential. So I think that there's never really been a set of threats to American higher education all combined at the same time. And I think, Tim, you're right to point to eroding public confidence, which certainly preceded the current administrative actions, preceded the previous administration. And I think that that has been the drumbeat that we haven't paid attention to in the country. What is it that we're not doing as a sector that is helping people lose or making people lose confidence in us? And I think that's an existential question. What are we delivering? Is it the right thing? Is it being delivered to the right people? And is it being delivered to the right people in the right way? I think that the answer to all of those is not quite. And so that's the existential threat, but I think the moment is actually a productive moment for us because we can and should and will use some of the chaos that we're in to build new kinds of institutions, new infrastructures, new ways of thinking about it, and that's one of the great things you and I have been working on.
So to the things that we've been working on, I'm not going to do a history lesson, but 52 years ago, the Carnegie Foundation created something called the Carnegie classifications, which sounds, for institutions of higher education, which for many of you may sound sort of oblique. What it was an effort at the time to say, what is this landscape of higher education? And you've probably heard of R1 or Research 1 institutions. That's a Carnegie classification. So since 52 years ago, they've actually become much more important than people recognize and influence the sector in pretty remarkable ways. They anchor some of the college rankings that we all hear about. They are influence distribution of large tranches of public capital to higher education. And they, perhaps mostly, they influence the behavior of higher education institutions themselves. So about 3 years ago, Ted and I had a conversation and said, basically, let's modernize these classifications. So first, we can actually be clear about what the landscape looks like today. Secondly, so we can be transparent about how we get to these classifications, because they were completely opaque. But most importantly, let's focus on student success. Which sounds straightforward to me, but
what an odd idea.
So in 2 weeks, we're going to actually release for every higher ed institution in the country what we're calling the Student Access and Earnings Classification, which at the core, we're going to look at institution by institution. Are you serving the students in the communities that you serve? So whether that's a regional community, an associate's college, a community college, whether that's a state, or whether it's the nation, with a particular emphasis on Pell Grants, which is, as you all know, a very good predictor of family income. 93% of Pell recipients' families are at $60,000 or below in terms of income. And then, likewise, look at earnings over time. So over an 8-year arc, any student who goes to a particular institution, whether they complete in that institution or not, we will account for their earnings. And then the intent there is to look in a clear-eyed way at the institutions that are in essence high access, high earnings, what we're going to call opportunity colleges and universities. These are the places that are the engines of the American dream. They are driving economic opportunity. The good news is there's hundreds of them. So discrete and particular focus on student success. So Ted, what did I miss, and why does it matter?
Yeah, I don't think you missed anything other than to talk a little bit about the old way we classified institutions and just how not helpful they were, right? So they were very descriptive categories like Masters Large. And you really know a lot about an institution if it's categorized as Masters Large. I mean, just think about the decisions you can make about whether you go to that school, whether you go to work at that school, whether you support that school philanthropically. Masters Large just sings, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So in addition to, I think the big change that we're making is focusing on student outcomes, and that's the deal. And when we look at the narrative about higher education and we look at the lack of confidence, at root, I believe, and my members believe, that it's because we haven't focused sufficiently on student success. So we have a 60% completion rate, just one data point. A 60% completion rate in American higher education. What's that really mean? 100% of the people who come to our doors want a degree, sort of why they come. But we disappoint 40% of them. And over time, that has accreted into a group of people in America, Americans who are our community, who say, it didn't work for me. And so by focusing on student success, we're reversing that. We're asking the question, which are the institutions, these opportunity colleges and universities, that are truly serving students in their community, particularly students, Pell Grant students, first-generation students, students for whom higher education is the only pathway to the middle class and to the American dream. So we believe that focusing on student success is really useful. The other thing that the classifications are going to do is they're going to regroup institutions. So there are plenty of surveys that talk about ROI, and they list 3,000 colleges from 1 to 3,000, and they're not very useful for two reasons. One, they're not sensitive to the different missions of institutions. So comparing Cal State LA to Harvard is not a very useful exercise, but most of the analyses do just that. So we're grouping institutions into different kinds of institutions, not master's large, but a comprehensive baccalaureate institution that delivers professional degrees in a rural area, and it's public. So that kind of Myers-Briggs, for those of you who've done that kind of Myers-Briggs classification is the start. And then within that, we're going to compare institutions in terms of their access and their outcomes. So institutions are going to learn two new things in 2 weeks. One, what's their village? Who are the institutions who, by latent content analysis, look like and act like they do? And two, within that village, who's doing a really good job of promoting student success? And we think that that combination is going to give Americans, they're going to be policymakers, philanthropists, parents, students, a whole new way of looking at colleges and universities, critically connected to what's happening with their students. So Tim and I talk a lot about, no, that's great. So we've got in 2 weeks on the 24th, we'll launch this thing, and we're not going to go home. So we're going to keep working on these things. So Tim, what's 10 years after launch look like?
Oh, 10 years after. I'm just trying to get through the next 2 weeks. So, but in light of the moment I think we're in, I think one of the real challenges of the defense of higher education in this context is that we anchor our defense on abstraction, on democracy, on academic freedom. Nobody outside of the academy really feels the issue of academic freedom at all. On innovation, discovery, science, these are really important things, but they're abstractions. And so I think in the immediate term, the case for higher education has to be made about, in terms of student success. It has to be. Because that, whether I have access to higher education, whether I earn something as a result, and I have a purposeful career as a result, and I'm not saddled with untenable debt, that resonates with everybody, in my view. So I think not just 10 years ahead, but in the immediate future, the opportunity here is to refocus on something that will be actually resonant across the board.
So as we start to focus on that, what are the things that you see ahead of us that can deepen and broaden that focus on student success? What kinds of innovation? This is the universe's great gathering of innovators. What next in terms of how to innovate institutions move forward?
I'll give two examples. One, the sector, in my view, and this may sound hyperbolic, but I don't think it is addicted to inputs. And the reason I say that is partly because the place I'm responsible for, the Carnegie Foundation, literally in 1906 said a 4-year college degree is 120 credits. And today, it's 120 credits. We've learned a great deal since 1906 about how people learn, about what knowledge is, about from neuroscientists and cognitive psychologists, and that this idea of an input, of the conflation of time and learning, the course credit, the credit hour, is the way we should define a college learning, is outlived its useful shelf life. I say this about high schools as well, because it's just as relevant there. So the opportunity is by pivoting explicitly to outcomes and student success. That opens up the door and the question to, well, maybe there are other models that get to those outcomes that don't require this input addiction. So some of these things are very low-hanging fruit. This is, in England, for example, you can do, generally people do a college degree in 3 years. Chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, economics, creative writing. Like, that's a shift we could make today. It would reduce the cost of college by 25%. A shout out for a 3-year degree. There are degrees in Europe where you do a 4th year, but often that 4th year is a practicum, where you're actually applying what you've learned in the classroom in a professional context, preparing you for your career. So there's low-hanging fruit here, and then because we're at ASU, there's also wildly interesting opportunities for newer models. If we stay tethered to outcomes and untether from inputs, to think about ways that you could educate millions more young people at very affordable levels in ways that we're leveraging their experience, their learning in all kinds of contexts, not just in the classroom. So I think the opportunity, Ted, is for the shift to outcomes, to open up the window, vector, whatever metaphor you want to use, to the development of new post-secondary modalities at broad scale that would be much more accessible, much more affordable, and much more competency-based.
I love it. I love it. And I think on the ground for institutions, that looks like a number of things. One is thinking about the end first. So if student success, which means sort of having a well-rounded education, getting a job, being a good member of a community, if that's the end in mind, and if we measure that end, we can invite all of the processes and all of the inputs to vary against that goal. So how do you get there? Well, I hope that we're moving toward a system in which some version of I don't really care is the way in which we support innovation in higher education. So Tom Vander Ark whispered in my ear about 117 years ago, badges, a lot like plastics for those of you who remember the movie, but badges. So when we were doing the survey of all of these institutions, we were looking at what the offerings were of colleges and universities, including associates colleges. The number one, the fastest growing area were certificates. So you already have this happening in higher education, where institutions are looking at breaking things into smaller pieces, establishing goals and outcomes for the competencies and skills that you need, and then being able to add those together to create something that you call a degree, that then hopefully leads to something that we call a job that leads to middle-class success.
And the reason tethering it to outcomes, just to stay on my message, matters so much is that, like, you take credentials. I was writing something the other day, and I went into a rabbit hole about credentials. In 2023, some august organization recognized that there were 46,000 verifiable credentials. I went back to that august organization to see how many credentials they were verifying today. It had gone up to 93,000 in just a year and a half. That should worry us. I mean, it's important. Credentials are important. Badges are important. But without the very direct tether to what difference are they making? How do we know who's getting to do what as a result of these credentials or badges? We're at risk.
Yeah, and I think that the we don't care, my cavalier we don't care, is we don't care as long as they're good, which is important. So one of the things that we do at ACE and have done for a long time is certify non-classroom learning for college credit. So we began with the military. Lots of training in the military, lots of it is really important. If you want to be a nurse and you've been a medic for 2 tours of duty, you're probably halfway there. Well, we can certify the military learning and make that a part of someone's transcript. So I think that this is a way in which higher education can work with new providers to use the same currency, which are credits, to be able to build a stack of experiences and skills that will then allow us to broaden what we mean when we say higher education, so that it's not just a 4-year residential liberal arts degree. By the way, between 11 and 14% of enrolled college students enjoy that experience. Pause. That's the right number. That's the very small number. So in part, this existential moment is simply flipping our telescope and looking at where students are, what they do, what they need, rather than basing all of this on an old, antique model of a 4-year residential liberal arts.
Ted, you asked me this question, so I have to ask you this question, and we have like 41 seconds left. So you fast forward 10 years. Where's our sector?
I think our sector is either dead or very much alive. I vote for the second. And I think that liveliness comes from a focus on student outcomes, a willingness to let the processes of learning and education vary wildly. It means coming up with responsible ways of assessing prior learning, and it has to do with institutions being much more welcoming to students who are adult students, who are veterans, who bring to us life experiences that are so important.
Drop the mic. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. The pregnant pause, right? Well, while we wait, how's everyone's evening? How did it go? Everything went well? Any karaokeers? Did the karaoke group grow? Woo, we got one, woo, at least one, right? Moderating this next conversation is Adam Freed, partner at GSV Ventures. He, along with the CEO of Pearson, Omar Abbosh, have a deep commitment to transforming learning at scale. Let's welcome them both to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? It's a marathon. There's a lot to go. Keep your energy up. Have coffee. It's wonderful to be here. It's so great to be in the conversations that we get to have here on StageX. And I'm so excited to talk to you this morning, Omar, about what you're doing at Pearson. My first observation is about 10 years ago, I had been at Google, I had been at Etsy, and I fell in love with a company in the education space and transitioned my career from pure technology to the combination of education and technology. And so when I read your bio and as we talked, I saw that you're making a similar transition. You were the president of industry solutions at Microsoft. You were the CEO of the CMT practice at Accenture. Incredible positions in technology, and now you've taken on Pearson, a storied name in the education sector. What motivated that for you?
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Adam. It wasn't the fact that I learned that Pearson used to have Baywatch in its portfolio.
True story, by the way.
And Madame Tussauds and various wine farms and things. But you're right, Pearson has got an incredible history from 1844 to today. But when I sort of stepped back to say, like, why would I do this? There were three things that came to mind. Firstly, I love the mission. Pearson's purpose is to help people realize the life they imagine through learning. And Microsoft and Accenture are incredibly mission-driven companies, but the impact is indirect. With Pearson, it's very direct. You can see the student that you help. You can see the nurse who gets accredited. You can see the engineer who develops cloud skills to get to the next stage of their career. And that's very motivating. The second thing was the whole business of Pearson is an incredibly broad scope company. It's across 100-odd countries. It serves K-12, higher ed, and workforce. And so it's an incredible platform with a lot of strategic options and a strong financial base. And then I felt, okay, you could really make a contribution here and make a difference. And then the third thing was AI. I was running the teams at Microsoft that were responsible for bringing AI to big corporations. And when I stepped back to think about what industry could be most impacted in a positive way by the use of AI in a good way, I felt education and learning was right there. And I felt maybe I can be useful here.
Amazing. Let me ask a question of the audience. How many of you have used a Pearson product at some point in your life? Okay,
Thank
if
you.
You're not raising your hand. You did. You just didn't realize it. How many of you have used that as either as an educator or a purchaser of the product as opposed to a student? Okay, so a number of people. So Pearson is a part of our lives, and we are at a point where AI is changing so much. And Pearson, I know, is evolving as well. So as we think about the Pearson that we knew and the Pearson is becoming, where are you on that journey? What's central to that journey for you right now?
Well, I mean, so the first thing I should say is, I mean, I joined Pearson 15 months ago, so I still feel very much like a beginner in this space. I'm learning a lot. I love spending time with our customers and partners just to learn more about the industry. But so one of the bits of feedback I had initially was that Pearson sometimes seems a bit complex. But when I actually lifted the hood and looked under the covers, it's not really that complicated. We do just three things. We create and curate content in the form of learning and assessments. And that's a huge part of what all the different Pearson assets do. The next thing we do is we distribute that content mainly digitally. And so well north of 80% of Pearson revenues come from selling software or services powered by software in one form or another. And then the third thing that we do is we help build and verify skills. And so for me, that's the core of what Pearson does. And so then the question is how do you apply technology and AI to help do that better, faster, cheaper for customers? And that's the heart of what we're focused on.
So AI is, of course, I mean, it's not just the buzzword of the day. I mean, it is literally changing our lives. I was running research reports last night that would have taken weeks to do using, at the time, Google Gemini. And we were on a panel yesterday talking about the future of AI and the idea that as we think about jobs of the future and what... Opa! So, as you think about generating, as you think about the future that we're looking at and how AI is going to affect it, I can't even imagine what the jobs are going to be, right? The world, I have a today paradigm to think about a future I can't predict, and yet you're now in the business of training people or helping people get trained for that future. How do you think about that, and how does AI play into that?
You know, it wasn't that long ago that you wouldn't have been able to imagine what a web designer was or a mobile phone component manufacturer. And, you know, the history of humanity has shown over and over and over is that with every wave of technology, it causes some dislocation and it causes, you know, incredible new waves of job opportunities that you couldn't forecast and foresee. And now the AI one is astonishing with its pace and the readiness of institutions, and civil society and humans to adapt to that, I think is going to be challenging. And we need to really be mindful of, you know, how we help people adapt to a whole series, as you said, a whole series of skills that we don't even know we need yet. And so that brings me straight back to one of the core parts of what we're focusing Pearson on, which is the one thing we know that every person is going to need is to be good at learning. So learning to learn is a pivotal set of skills.
I love that, learning to learn.
Yeah, learning to learn. And learning scientists have taught us an enormous amount about actually how to do it. And some of it's behavioral and some of it's metacognitive. And you can embed a lot of those techniques into the products that you use for learning and education today. I would love to see us being much more intentional across our educational establishments, formal, vocational, and workplace, to help people develop the skills for learning to learn. And I think that is the best way you can help prepare people for an era of AI where the half-life of skills is declining fast. You see that most explicitly in the world of technology, but it happens, you know, everywhere else. And so it's not far away where you're going to be learning economics with AI and finance with AI and HR with AI. And so I think that's the things that we need to help prepare the world for.
As you... There's a bunch of questions I wanted to ask all at the same time, so I'll choose one at a time. I think often educators themselves are trying to figure out how to be a part of that journey. How are you including the educator into the journey, or is that a part of the way you think, or are you increasingly thinking directly about workforce and students? Are they different components to you?
Oh gosh, I mean, there's so many things I want to say about that. I think the world of technology is filled with like incredible, brilliant people who, you know, can conceptualize new ways of doing things, you know, from a standing start. That optimism sometimes results in, you know, assumptions about like how easy it will be for, you know, this particular widget or tool or product to like, you know, solve giant problems. And actually, the real life often doesn't play out that way. It takes much longer for technology to diffuse and get used because those of us who, you know, work in education, we have our own ways of our practices, our approaches. There's a vast number of things going on in and outside the classroom beyond just the technology. And so Pearson, I think, tries hard to think about how can we be on the side of educators, recognizing that to help the 8 billion people on the planet adapt to the world of AI, you need the hundreds of millions of educators to help humans develop the skills for learning to learn. And so we're spending a lot of time thinking about how can we be really helpful and effective on that. And so I'm happy to sort of double click on it, but that's the heart of our mission, is helping educators help humans advance their skills to develop learning.
That's great. And you know, we were talking in the green room about some of the interesting products you guys are putting out right now. Is there one or two you want to share so people can conceptualize how Pearson's putting this practice into the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in the early stages of adoption of AI in our technologies, but we are making it pervasive across basically every single thing that you've heard of from Pearson. And so, I mean, a couple of the ones that come to mind that I really like is we help GED learners. And so these are people who are later in life, normally for pretty tough reasons, go and collect their high school diploma. But one of the things that we've learned from them is they love engaging with an AI to learn because it's less embarrassing to show things that you don't know about. And so AI can prove to be incredibly useful in that context. The highest usage of our AI study tools, I like to think of them as a kind of our AI office hours, happens between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. in the morning. So you're stuck on something in chemistry and biology, your office hours professor is not available at that time, and you go to AI tool and it leads you through a Socratic dialogue to help you solve the thing that you're stuck on. That has proved to be incredibly effective. Can
I just double click? I mean, 11 p.m. to 1 a.m., is that resonant for all of us? That was when I was using AI last night, so I think that's right.
I mean, I didn't take you as a like higher ed student, Adam, but I mean...
We're always learning. We're on a lifetime learning journey now, right?
Well, I mean, you're 100% right. I mean, obviously, the whole thing about if you believe that AI is going to change a lot, then of course we have to be on a lifelong learning journey. And actually, I think that's an opportunity for a lot of institutions, is that instead of a single slingshot approach to education where you take a kid and you go through formal education once and then you expect that to last over the 100-year life, actually is to turn our institutions into places where people keep coming back for lifelong learning at different stages of their life as we need to refresh our skills for future industries.
That is wonderful. There was a translation tool you had mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, so...
I speak a lot of languages, so I get excited about that. So.
Ça m'a fait beaucoup de plaisir. No, I mean, so you've got our English language learning app, so we've got digital avatars where you can say, like, I'm going to go and do a business review. Let's simulate that together, and the avatar will talk to you about it. Or I'm going to go and set objectives with my staff, and let's go and talk about that. And so we're having, real-world scenarios embedded in language learning apps where the AI avatar will engage with you and allow you to develop your language skills. And as you know, people learning English, which is the language of business, it can fundamentally advance their lives. And so, we feel it's very important to help folks with that.
Yeah, and I mean, you really hit on that point of embarrassment, too, because I think language learning or doing math in a classroom, embarrassment is a huge factor. And as you said, those AI tools really allow you to practice on your own, build your confidence, get feedback that feels safer. Are there stats or stories you're seeing on that carry that to life?
Like I said, we're a little bit early. The things that we're seeing, and then we've said this publicly, is that for our properties that have AI study tools in them, we're seeing double-digit growth in those areas, which tells us something about the affection that students have for that. Anecdotally, when I read the feedback of what students are saying to us, it's language like, this saved my life. I had given up on this course, I'd given up on that professor, and you helped me go and pass the exam. And so I think, for the educators in here know much better than I do. A lot of students, professors show up, they want to teach people and help people learn. A lot of students show up and they just want to get past the exam. And so how you bring those two tasks together is, I think, a function that people like us can contribute to in a big way. So help the learning process really work, not by giving people the answer, by guiding them to the answer and helping them understand what skills they really have and which ones they need to develop, but then also giving them the base knowledge needed to get the skills to pass the exam.
You said something as well as we were talking earlier that I thought was interesting. How many folks are in the startup ecosystem here this morning? Okay, a few. It's probably a little early for the startup crew. We'll see them at 10 o'clock tonight. But we were talking about your interest in learning with and from and partnering with startups. And that's not something I think we've always historically associated with sort of the bigger companies in the sector.
Some years ago, I had the joy of co-authoring a book, and it was all about how to not die from disruption, basically. And the heart of that was that if you're a big organization, whether you're a company or a not-for-profit, you have to lean into innovation. Innovation happens in the startup ecosystem. It doesn't actually really happen in big corporations because of our cost of capital. And so you have to be good at working with startups. And so if you're going to engage with startups, the thing that I always try and preach to the team around me is we're not engaging with them to teach them. We're engaging with them so they teach us. And they can teach us, yes, about AI, but also about culture, of how to be nimble, how to be entrepreneurial. And those are things that are incredibly valuable to any big organization.
Amazing. So one of the things I always love with these sessions to leave with is the idea that people can engage with the work that you're doing. And we were talking about a white paper that you put out that I would love for you to share a little bit about.
Yeah, a few months ago we published something called Lost in Transition. And it's about the people who get lost along the way from learning to earning. Actually, when you look at the lost wages in the US economy alone, from people who don't make it from school to jobs or don't make it fast from vocational work into paid work, people who drop out of high school, drop out of university, people who get made unemployed by restructurings or technology dislocations, that costs the US economy $1.1 trillion a year. It's a vast amount. And so anything that we can do to shorten the transition time from typically 24 weeks from higher ed into a job, say to 18 weeks, that saves the US economy $40 billion. And so you can make a huge dent just addressing those drop-off points where people get, fall into the cracks.
And that's publicly available on your website?
Yeah, it's on the website, and we talk about two things to do: learning to learn, and a whole set of things there, and alternative skilling pathways, recognizing that we don't need to treat kids like battery chickens on one pathway, but to find all the alternative routes, particularly in the blue-collar and new-collar spaces, which the economy desperately needs.
Amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time, Omar. This is great. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great morning.
All right, everyone. This next panel has a title that pretty much speaks for itself. Freakonomics, Shrek, Dreamworks, Hollywood meets high school. We're bringing together some brilliant and unexpected minds to talk about what happens when storytelling, data, and immersive tech come together to transform how students learn. Moderating the conversation is Amy McGrath, VP of Educational Outreach and Student Services at ASU Preparatory Academy. She's joined by economist and Freakonomics co-author Steve Levitt, Walter Parks, chairman and co-founder of Dreamscape Learn, and film producer John Williams. Yes, Shrek John Williams. This one's going to be fun. Let's welcome them to the stage. Keep the wooing, that's good.
Well, good morning. My name is Amy McGrath, and I have the great privilege of leading the K-12 portfolio for Arizona State University through a network of public charter schools serving students both in Arizona and in partnership with schools around the country, around the globe. We do that by leveraging ASU's deep engine of innovation to elevate outcomes, take what's working, and make it accessible for all. I've also had the great privilege of working closely with these three individuals on thinking about engagement and its correlation to elevating outcomes. So you might be thinking, this is an interesting crew to be thinking about education. What do these guys know about students falling behind or classrooms or the daily pressures of teaching? But these three creatives have shaped how millions of people think and learn through storytelling, through design, and through data. And that's what great educators do as well. We have the opportunity today to hopefully borrow from their playbook. So I'm going to start first with Steve Levitt. Steve, can you just give us, from your perspective, what's broken in school today?
Well, let me just start by saying, you're right, Amy. Well, what do I know about schools? I mean, I've thought a lot about it. I've had a lot of kids. I've been teaching in higher education for 25 years. But I think if anything that I have to say is useful, it's my old friend Danny Kahneman used to talk about the outsider view and how it's often easier to see things that are broken from the outside than the inside. And my perspective is, as we've been launching a school, we're starting high schools now, is that we just started from the perspective of, if you were going to build a school from scratch, what would it look like? Rather than, here's what we have and would go. And to me, the thing that we struggle with the most right now is that it's just the history of an education system that started in the mid-1800s, built on a technology around a teacher in front of a classroom, which I don't think you would use that technology at all if you were starting from scratch. You just wouldn't have the idea that there should be a teacher teaching the same lesson to 25 or 30 kids at the same time. You'd be using technologies that we have now, which are much more bespoke and directed towards individual kids. And the other thing I think that troubles me when I look at the system is that I think we all agree about what we're trying to create, a set of kids who love learning, they're engaged, they're prepared for the world around them. But that is amorphous, and so we end up trying, we use a lot of metrics which are very imprecise in trying to do that. And in the end, as we've been trying to start a school, you see how all of those rules, like that a kid has to sit in a seat for a certain number of hours to get credit for science, like that has nothing to do with whether or not the kid understands science, and yet it gets in the way of other ways of teaching. So those are the two things that come to my mind, Amy.
Walter?
Well, I certainly agree about education not having changed in any fundamental ways. I'm not even sure I'd say the 1800s. I might say 2,000 years. I guess in my perception of it, and as a relative newcomer to all this, that it really comes down to engagement and attention. In other words, unless those doors are open, nothing happens. Part of my perception about this actually comes, you were mentioning your kids, from my kids. I have a daughter who is a demonstration teacher at the UCLA School of Education, and she teaches very young children. And she comes out of the Reggio Emilia tradition of inquiry-based learning. And I see what she is able to do with her kids. They once adopted a slug and spent about 4 weeks studying everything they could do about that slug. And when I saw the science that they were able to sort of master based on their emotional engagement with that particular creature, it was astounding to me. In fact, there's a paper about it you can look up called, I think it's called Science with Sluggy. Then my other input came from my son, a very brilliant kid, game designer and a screenwriter, who was incredibly ADHD. And those of us who have dealt with ADHD kids know that it's not a lack of attention necessarily, because when they're interested in something, you can't get them off it. Well, I would hold that we live in a media-saturated world that has made us all ADHD. And it's just the truth. And we keep on creating digital and electronic tools that hopefully will help, starting with AI, which has certainly overtaken everyone's conversation. And I think that what we have to decide is, okay, that's a fantastic thing. How are we going to deal with the ultimate issue, which has, to me, getting students engaged in learning and getting their attention? And we have found at Dreamscape that there are two ways. One main way to do that. We're all hardwired with something, it's called story. It doesn't mean we can all make stories, but everyone can respond to a story. We're finding that as a source of intense engagement in education is proving to be extraordinarily helpful. The other thing I would say is that last time I checked, no one has ever answered a text while in a headset.
John.
Is this on? Yeah. Well, I was thinking when being asked onto this panel that I had no idea why I was going to be here, but as and it occurred to me there's a song once came to mind, the song "Once in a Lifetime" by David Byrne. It's like, how did I get in this beautiful house? I had this beautiful wife, and how did I get here? And it occurred to me there were 3 events in my life that kind of like were defining extraordinary events that I would kind of had a similar experience that I'm having right now, which is at one point I was working on a project, a book that I picked up called 7 Years in Tibet, and I went to the Dalai Lama's home in Dharamsala, and we had yak butter tea and stampa, and we spent 2 hours talking as a small group, in a subject that he was very interested in, concerned about, and knowledgeable about, of what was even this project I was working on, which was just felt like, how did that ever happen? And I think it's by the completely unexpected results of having been pursuing different interests. The second time that came up was when I went to, thanks to Walter Parks and his wife Laurie, to the Shrek Academy Awards night, and won the Academy Award for Best Animated Picture for the first time. But it was sort of a, how did I get here? What is it? But the third time is being right here, right now, because what I am is a fan of what the original, new, innovative education has been, and the work that Sal Khan has been doing with ASU, and what Steve Levitt is doing with the Levitt Lab, I think, and Walter doing with Dreamscape. I think these are just extraordinary, original, innovative programs that have real potential of inspiring kids and teachers and the whole system, creating an ecosystem that's completely different. I got a very progressive high school where I could pursue drama, Chinese history, religion, philosophy, independent studies, and then went to one college I applied to, which is Colorado College, which was a block plan with one course study at a time, one course every month, but it was total immersion, and I only wanted to go there because it was a original education approach that I thought was really compelling. But I just think the work that's being done by this group is extraordinary, and I'm just a fan, so that's why I'm here. Thank you.
Well, and John's being very humble because the first time John and I talked, he said, how do we create schools so we can have more movies like Shrek? And that's exactly what we need to do, is engage students so we get more creatives as the output. So kind of segueing into what is immersive learning, talking about storytelling and what that does to unlock learning in classrooms. Walter, we're going to tee up a video.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, we're going to put up just a few minutes. It's a shortened version. This is a little video that attends to, actually, if any of you have a chance to come and see our booth, our newest product, which is, we've completed introductory biology, and this is introductory chemistry, and it's just a little intro that's given by our subject matter expert, an extraordinary teacher and chemist named Ian Gould, President's Professor, talking a little bit about our approach to chemistry. So we could run that, and then we could talk a little bit about it.
My name's Ian Gould. I'm President's Professor in the School of Molecular Sciences here at Arizona State University. The biggest problem, I believe, is that students just don't like general chemistry. And you know what? It's not their fault. The problem is that general chemistry curriculum was really developed in the 60s, even the 50s. And at that time, you could get away with general chemistry being essentially an academic exercise for students. That's not serving students anymore. Like today's students, when they come to college, they want to feel they're going to contribute. They're going to contribute to society, or they're going to get a job, or they're going to feel like they have something useful to do. And general chemistry curriculum just hasn't kept up with that. So students don't need more chemistry. What they need more of is seeing how chemistry is relevant.
Welcome to the Institute for Telepresent Exploration.
This is a completely different way of teaching the subject. It doesn't just give them a narrative, it immerses them in that narrative. Right? It's not just showing them something, it's putting them in that place.
Let's get started.
So the way this works is the students will have a VR experience, like 10 or 15 minutes, and then they take that and then spend 2 hours in the lab working on materials connected to the VR. And when the students go into the lab after the Dreamscape, they will see a sample on their lab bench, which comes directly from the narrative that they were in, right? That's something that no student has experienced before.
The only thing standing between us and a digital apocalypse, some salt crystals and a single hair. Thankfully, science allows us to turn minuscule clues into major revelations.
So by integrating the labs and the story, the students really find a need to know, right? They find like a need to what's going on in the lab because it connects to what they just experienced, and they know is going to connect to the next one too. So that increases the level of engagement in the lab in a way that just isn't possible any other way.
All right, tell us a little bit about Dreamscape Learn and what is it doing in classrooms?
Well, as Ian says, it is about, as I said before, engagement. We do not see the use of VR as a sort of a full-scale migration to something called the metaverse. What we use VR for is a way to really, really connect our students to a particular story, and in solving the issues out of that story, have a reason to learn. I mean, I think, Steve, you might have introduced me to this concept, or we talked about it once, just-in-case learning versus just-in-time learning. I mean, all of us went to biology classes or chemistry classes and learned about cell signaling or learned about how atoms work, assuming one time in my life that would be important. And I have not found many times it was important to know how to cut open a fish. So two things comes out of Dreamscape. If I'm involved in a narrative in which to save a creature or to solve a problem or come to the successful end of a story, requires me to understand I'm learning that in a context on behalf of solving that problem that I'm emotionally engaged in. And the other thing we try to do is focus in on what my colleagues talk about, as you all do, transferable skills. I mean, science is not so much about how to pour something in the test tube. Science is increasingly about how to deal with data, how to model data, how to collaborate with people. And we really look very closely at the sorts of standards suggested by different institutions and have tried to sort of move our pedagogy towards what is relevant in this century. I think it's all about teaching what is relevant and also teaching in our students' native language.
Yeah, I've appreciated listening to the three of you talk, and a common underpinning theme beyond storytelling has been data, something that Steve has gone deep in. Steve, talk a little bit about how, from a behavioral economics lens, we push through systemic barriers.
I don't know. I'm not sure I have anything good to say about that, Amy, but let me answer a question I can answer better. Responding to you, Walter, it just reminded me of a story when I was co-teaching, and on the first day of class, the other professor, in a very stern way, turned to the group and said, "If I ever catch you on your computers playing games or texting during class, you fail the class." And I stood up after him. I said, if I ever am so unengaging as a teacher and the message I'm trying to give you is so boring that you would rather be playing games on computer, please do it, because it's my job as an educator to come up with something that you care about more than the game. And in some ways, that's the fundamental, I think that's, it's almost like a fundamental choice you have to make when you approach education is, are the kids going to play by your rules, or are you going to play by their rules? And I think that's where storytelling and data, they all come together. In fact, look, there's nothing more boring than statistics and data analysis about a problem you don't care about. But if you find the problem that a particular kid cares about, maybe it's a slug. For me, it was betting on thoroughbred horses. So, when I was in high school, even though it was illegal for me to do it, I wasn't old enough, the only thing I cared about was trying to figure out who's going to win the next race. And I learned every data tool I know now because data was a way that I thought I might be able to do it. So I think that's the spirit in which it's kind of, look, I think data are really important. And behavioral economics, they're all important, but somehow it's almost about, to me, more about a mindset of where you start. And if you start at that position where, really your position, Walter, where are the kids? Who are they? What are they like? And then you build a world around them, knowing that you want to move them from the things 14-year-olds care about to the things that will, give them fulfilling, interesting, socially productive lives.
I just need that. I love to ask any of that. I just loved hearing one of the great data minds and kind of thinkers of our time start by saying, I want to tell you a story. Think about that. And that's a great story. That is the most concise way and the most engaging way you could have possibly expressed to us a very complex idea, which is that it's really not about the kids' lack of attention, it's really about the teacher's responsibility. All of that was encoded in that story. This was a perfect example of the power of story in education. And it really, I just sort of believe that given the amount of data that's floating around in our heads, given the amount of inputs, we need to find every tool we have to keep students engaged. Now, there's been a lot of work in gamification for certain things. It's fantastic. I have learned one thing, which is that there are many kinds of learners. There are learners who have a great intuitive, computational brain, who have aesthetic sense, have spatial, emotional intelligence, athletic, et cetera, et cetera. It's very hard to teach all of those kinds of kids, to say nothing about kids that come from vastly different socioeconomic backgrounds. But I have found that pretty much everybody responds to a good story. So if there's a way that we can wrap these difficult subjects, not to the detriment of the educational, discipline, but rather use it as a way of engagement, we can open the tent for students who don't think of themselves as science learners in a way we never could before.
I'd like to push just a little bit on how you were kind of talking about boredom and how you're trying to incent kids to pay attention. I've appreciated how you talk about skewed incentives and test scores as a wedge. Talk a little bit about rules that are worth breaking when building a school model.
So, I come from higher education, and I had this funny comment, another story. So I was talking with Hank Green.
Let me tell you a story.
Yeah. So Hank Green is, of the Green brothers, and they do Crash Course and whatnot. And so they've spent all of their time for the last 15 years really aimed at a high school audience. And then they decided that if they really thought the system was broken, and they partnered with ASU to try to then go and change the way we do college courses. And it was interesting because Hank Green didn't know anything about college, but he felt like high school was so broken that he couldn't possibly fix high school. He better go fix college. And I've taught for 25 years at the university level, and I feel like that's so broken I can't even begin to fix it, so I'm going to go try and get high school. So it's a little worrisome that the people who know a lot about an area are afraid to try to fix it. But what was really shocking to me as we've been partnering with ASU is how many rules there are around what kids have to do, and it limits your ability to even to get started. Like the seat time issue, the idea that you only know science if you spend a certain amount of time in a seat. So, look, I'm very much in favor of rule breaking, and as we've tried to launch our school, Amy, at ASU, there are two ways to think about it. You can learn the rules, and then try and pick and choose which ones to break. But I have a different view, which is, look, I don't even want to know the rules, okay? I do not want to know the rules. I want to set this up the way we want it, and then I want to surround myself with a bunch of people who are just going to figure out how to break all those rules. And I don't even want to know what the rules are that got broken. I would just like to know that in the end, we ignored the rules. And that is, look, I understand it's a little bit dangerous perspective, but I think, I really look at the complexity of the high school education system and all of the barriers. And I've come to believe the only hope you have is just to have a lot of radical people going out and doing radical things and hoping that somehow something will catch and will start to spill over. I think my own sense is if you try to tackle the system of what we have, it is too overpowering, and it is too strong and too entrenched to have any hope. And so and the question is, how can you fiddle around on the edges in a way that will begin to trickle down into the system is the only way to make change, is my sense.
Yeah, I'd say if you are an educator in the room or you're building new models, I challenge you to surround yourself with people who don't know about education because they ask really simple questions like, why? Over and over and over until you just start breaking the rules to design something good. John, over to you. I'd love to hear how do you think about, first of all, I know your passion for creativity and how the current traditional system is crushing creativity in kids. So how do you design for belonging and not just novelty?
I would say that as a starting point, right now, when you look at the news today, what's really clear is that there's no way of predicting where the markets are going to go tomorrow, next week, next year, and the job markets are going to be equally impossible to predict right now. The world picture is so dramatically shifting like right now that education trying to guess what the future job prospects are and the training is almost impossible. And so the focus seems to be, I read that some Yale study about high school students had said recently that 75% of kids are feeling extremely bored or unengaged and dislike their high school experience. And I think that it seems to call out that the whole thing that the con world schools, the con schools, what Levitt Lab and otherwise are trying to do is create an environment where kids are engaged and inspired, and that is the best thing. And a safe place and a place they want to be. That seems like the ultimate test, that they want to do the learning that they're getting, they're pursuing things that they're interested in. You can't just make it be what, as Ken Robinson said, this industrial model, it just doesn't apply. There's everybody, it's a widget making, and it throws out, there's so many people who are disengaged. It's got to be an experiential change, and what we all had, those teachers and courses that were inspiring, sometimes they're few and far between, depending on one's experiences, but they are there, and that's the hardest thing to get, is what turns kids on, and that will keep people lifelong learners, and that gives it, I think, a perpetual prospect.
I mean, John, that is so, it's such an insightful thing to say. It just reminds me when I first started teaching at the University of Chicago, I had this sense that I was required to teach the kids a set of skills that they would use and remember. And that is the overriding force that we have in high school. Like, there's almost a desperation to make sure that the kids can do algebra, geometry, calculus, that they know a set of facts, whatever it is. And it was at the 5-year reunion of my first class of students, when they came back, that I sat down and we had beers, and I asked them some really simple questions on the content of the class that I had taught them. There's something called the Lagrangian. It's the most basic thing that you teach kids in advanced, in intermediate, micro. And not a single one of them, 12 of them around the table, could even begin to solve the problem that had been the centerpiece of this class 5 years earlier. And as I pressed them on content, I realized not one of them remembered anything about the content on the courses. And I said, well, what do you remember about the course? And one of them said, oh my God, I remember the time that you forgot to pick your kid up from daycare, and you said your wife was gonna kill you because of that. And it's to your point, Walter, about storytelling. And it was a transformational moment for me because I actually, at that moment, I stopped trying to worry about anything my kids, or any of my students would remember about the actual content. And all I tried to do was to engage them on ideas. And I think it's this point where if they're when you're interested in something, when you're engaged, if you're equipped with the set of skills that allow you to learn what you need to learn in that moment, the just-in-time learning, that's all you really need. And the obsession with the facts and the details and the proofs about triangles, it isn't important that they remember exactly what, being congruent to some other thing matters. It's that they have a strategy and a desire to learn things. And it's easy to forget that when your job is at the end of a certain amount of time to give a kid an A, a B, or a C, and it depends somehow on that. And so that's, I think, one of the hardest things to remember is what the actual goal should be of education once you get deep into it.
I want to add something to that basis, I think you said earlier, which is that all that's true, but particularly for high schools, there are colleges they want to get into, and there are placement exams they have to take, and there's competencies they have to show, and they have teachers who have been taught in a certain way. And therefore, the role of innovation, particularly in high school, has to be dealt with in a very nuanced way. It cannot be about thinking you can pull up the railroad tracks. I think it has to do with understanding what are the givens and how can you innovate within those givens. So in our case, well, we have to learn the essentials of chemistry. Maybe you learn it in the old way where you sort of scaffold it, and teach orbitals and this and that, or can you create a narrative which goes to the same learning goals, but does it in a different organic way? You have teachers who have taught a certain way, who are very talented. So you can't expect that teacher to necessarily say, I'm not teaching that way anymore, but rather provide materials that are enlivening and that fit on top of a more conventional way of teaching. My team over there will grin because they've heard this so often. There's something I used to say in movies, which is the more exotic the scenery, the more comfortable the chair. Meaning if you do, in my case, the Men in Black movies, well, they were cop movies. So as long as you understood that genre, you could go way out there with comedy and with imagination because you felt settled. I think it's important in education that we keep the chairs somewhat comfortable for administrators and for teachers and bring our innovations to kind of broaden the horizons as opposed to think that we're in a position to change the rules.
So we have just 2 minutes left. As we think about the avalanche of emergent technology, I think all of us have expressed the concern that imagination is at stake for kids if we don't design the right models. So briefly, the three of you, what is your hope for the future of education? Just that.
Wow. There's every now and then we all remember that moment when you felt an actual visceral connection to an idea, moment in the book, a teacher, a discussion. And those become few and far between, and I believe they tend to be drowned out by an onslaught of media. So my hope is that somehow that we're able to take that same media and turn it into a force of attention and engagement.
If I have to think about education more broadly, my hope would be that we would spend more time teaching kids about things they'll use in their life than things that the last time they'll use them is on the exam that they do it. So related to things like mental health and data as well. But there's so many things that we use. I mean, everything that's turned out to be valuable in my adult life, it wasn't things I learned in a classroom. There were many things I learned when I was a student. I learned from teachers. But I think it's an accident that the set of topics we teach, I think, is accidental. And I would like to move towards a set of topics which actually will help people function and thrive in life.
And I would just say the Holy Grail seems to be finding a place, an environment where kids can find their enthusiasm, their interests and passions, explore different things, and want to be there and feel encouraged in an environment that inspires them and their friends, and it's a much more well-rounded, full experience that they're walking away with, and where a place they want to go.
Awesome. Huge amount of gratitude for these three being here. Thank you all for this great day.
All right, our next fireside chat. You would think how many times I've said fireside chat, I would get it by this point. It features a conversation about leadership, innovation, and the evolving role of education in shaping communities. Moderating is Bill Hansen, President and CEO of Building Hope, and joining him is the Governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Well, good morning, everybody. Has everybody had enough coffee? All right, we're ready to roll. Bill, let's go.
Well, Governor, thank you for being here. This is a wonderful gathering of folks that are very much consistent with your background, and I thought it might be helpful to just start off by telling a little bit about your life story and what brought you to become governor, but your upbringing and other things.
Well, we'll get through that quickly, but first of all, thank you for letting me join you. I have heard about this gathering for over a decade, and our Secretary of Education, Amy Gadara, is here, and I want everybody to give her a round of applause because she is a national leader in what she does. And of course, our current Superintendent of Public Education, we found here. She was in Arizona, and we stole her. And now Emily Ann Gullickson is leading K through 12 education along with early childhood education in Virginia, and we are so thankful for all of you to have great people who we can recruit to come to Virginia. Listen, my story is very quick. I grew up in Virginia. I'm homegrown. I grew up with a mother who just instilled in me an absolute passion for education. My mom was a nurse, but she was also an educator. And I vividly remember her staying up late at night with such commitment to a single student, to a student who was struggling, to a moment where she could engage in a different way. And I just watched the impact that she had on her students, and I watched the impact she had on my life. And so I was very early on instilled with this passion for education and the difference that it can make in one child's life. You couple that with the fact that I am not a career politician by any means. I had a business career for 30 years, and I thought I had reached my dream job. I had grown up, as I said, in a pretty normal American family, ups and downs. My dad lost his job twice during middle school and high school, and we had to move and remake our family. And I had a chance to play basketball in college. I had a chance to go to graduate school. I had a chance to have a career and lead a company that I never thought I would ever have that opportunity. And I thought I was in my dream job. And then I had a real wake-up call in my own prayer life. And I felt a real strong call to quit my job and run for governor in Virginia. Now, I have a warning for all of you that if you have that moment, which my wife calls my midlife crisis, you need to tell your spouse before you do it. And so when Suzanne and I had a moment in the middle of COVID in July, and I asked her to go on a walk with me, and she looked incredibly fearful. What is wrong? And I told her that I was going to quit my job and run for governor. As the tears filled her eyes and her lip quivered, she said, "Governor of what?" And I said, "My beloved Virginia." And what a journey it has been. And what an honor it is to go to work every day. There is not a morning where I don't wake up and first am so grateful for the opportunity to serve, for the experience set that I bring, which is just different, and the people that have come around us to really both serve and lead transformation in the Commonwealth of Virginia on so many important fronts, with education being at the top of the list. And so, Bill, thank you. Thank you for your service. For those of you that don't know, I recruited Bill to serve on our State Board of Education, and he has been one of the stalwarts who has helped us transform what we're doing in Virginia. But on top of that, I just recruited him to go sit on the board of one of our great four-year institutions of higher education, George Mason. And so with all the other things you have going on, thanks for helping make the Commonwealth of Virginia the best state to live, work, raise a family, and get an education.
Thank you, Governor. It's an honor. And I just, even going back 4 years to your campaign, this was personal to me as well. I've got 6 children. I've been in Virginia for 60 years and 17 grandchildren. And with all of the COVID...
Can they all vote? 17 voters, that's a good thing.
One's close. Trying to get a pipeline for you. But this really was personal in terms of what we were coming through with the pandemic and the learning loss. And even had one of my daughters homeschool her children because of some of the challenges that we were facing. And just, and I think there was a seminal moment on the campaign when the focus really became on parents and not the system. And just maybe take us back a little bit of 4 years of how the education issue really, I think, catapulted you into the...
I hate to do this for everybody because I think we are so grateful to have the pandemic behind us. But what we learned during that period, I think, is so important we don't forget. And therefore, let me just back everybody up. I'm going to take you back to the summer of 2020 and into 2021, and particularly what was going on in our schools. In Virginia, we had a policy coming from government to keep our schools closed. We were 46th in the nation in getting our schools back open. Children were being told that a quality education was a 12-inch screen. And in fact, that parents and students were being told that their students were doing well in that environment. And that is the foundation. And that is why when parents had, for the first time, maybe ever, had a kitchen table side view of what was going on in their child's education, we saw parents in Virginia and parents all over the country stand up and say, we must do better. We must do better. And I do believe that that moment is a moment that we must continue to embrace, because the lack of transparency, the lack of expectations of excellence, the lack of accountability is exactly at the heart of what we're going to be talking about this morning, and I know all of you talk about all the time, is that it was a moment where, not just because of the pandemic, but because of decisions that had been made in the Commonwealth of Virginia over a period of 5 and 10 years before, were now manifesting themselves in a severe lack of performance, academic achievement, social development. And yes, it was starting to show up really in a big honesty gap. The honesty gap of how our students were doing on national tests, the NAEP scores, and how they were doing on watered-down state tests. And now it was clear that not only were our students not proficient, they were rapidly declining in their proficiency, even though it wasn't near what it needed to be. Now, I also want to make a very clear statement This is not about the passion and commitment of teachers. Because what we saw during that time period was Herculean efforts by teachers to do anything they could come up with in order to try to stimulate a 7-year-old on a Zoom call to pay attention and to learn to read. This was about expectations of excellence that had been watered down over a long period of time. And what do I mean by that? In Virginia, where we historically had had the highest expectations for proficiency, over a period of time, they were watered down, and Virginia became the state with the lowest expectations for proficiency. And in fact, even the Washington Post, that doesn't agree with me very much, said, I can't believe Virginia's doing this. And so all of a sudden, the expectations on our children changed materially. And let me just be clear. The kids were meeting these low expectations. The words soft bigotry of low expectations couldn't be more true, because the groups of students that in fact fell furthest behind were our minority students in Virginia, black students, Hispanic students, students with disabilities. And that was the moment where this transparency of parents' ability to see what was going on in the classroom became so real. And that's when we all stood up together and said, we must transform this. We must reestablish expectations of excellence that we can not only lift the floor, we can take off the ceiling. We must have good, accurate data that tells us how our children are doing. We must share that data with parents so they can understand really how their children are doing. And we must be able to see how schools are doing so that that transparent data can translate into accountability. And if we start down this path aggressively, then we can do something that not only must be done, but I firmly believe that we can lead a movement of excellence, transparency, accountability, and finally, the single most important measure, results. And that's what we started with this election in 2021, was a holistic statement, not Republicans versus Democrats, but parents, Democrat parents, independent parents, Republican parents, standing up and saying, we must have better outcomes for our kids. And that's what we walked into in 2022.
And Governor, just maybe extending off of that, when I joined the state board your first year, you really charged us with some important things. One is to create the best standards in our country for history, computer science, also to get our accountability framework in place, and also on the issue of school choice with the lab school creation that you were able to work through the legislature. But just love a little bit of color around any of those 3 priorities that we really were focused on from day one.
So all of you have been working your careers at these topics. I first start with the theme of this conference, learning at light speed. 670 miles per hour is light speed. If we are learning at light speed, but we're 5 or 10% off of our course in an hour, we're going to be absolutely in the wrong place, in the wrong solar system. And so we first have to know where we are, really. Where do we start? And that required us to embrace transparency. Let's not try to sugarcoat this. How are our schools doing? How are our students doing? And let's be transparent. Not to condemn, not to belittle, but to know where we are. And that was our first big step. We made a promise to Virginia families and our commitment to Virginia families that transparency was where we were going to start. And it wasn't pretty. Literally 2/3 of Virginia's middle school and elementary school students are not proficient in math and reading. 2/3. And so we had to go to work and say, first and foremost, we've got to address proficiency. But then the second piece of this, and I'll come back to some of the programs and policies that we put in place. The second part of this journey was to establish a destination. And the destination had to be excellence. If we don't expect a lot out of our children, we will not get a lot out of them. And so basically redoing standards and expectations became a top priority. I told the team I want the very best history standards in the nation. I want us to tell the good and the bad. We have to have the best reading standards, the best math standards, the best science standards, the best computer science standards, which, by the way, we now are said to have had, and we're one of the few states that has AI as part of our computer science standards. We must have the best expectations. Then we have to have a system of judging how far away we are from those expectations and communicating that to parents and understanding where our schools are. And that required us to first develop a methodology to communicate with parents. And today, if you are a parent in the Commonwealth of Virginia, you can go on a portal and it is password protected, and you can download how your child is doing. It's fully transparent. And can you imagine the difference in parent-teacher conferences when parents come armed with all the data about their own child? And then finally, we had to overhaul our accreditation system. And bluntly, accreditation was a box-ticking exercise. I asked a very basic question. How can 2/3 of our middle and elementary school students not be proficient in reading and math, and yet only 10% of our schools are non-accredited or on the needs real work list? That can't be. And so we went back and we split our accreditation system into 2 buckets. You're accredited if you have all of the factors necessary in order to operate a school: an emergency evacuation plan, good financial controls, the lines in the parking lot are right. But we have to have a performance assessment and support system that says, how are you doing? How are you doing with mastery? How are you doing with growth? And how are you doing preparing a student to be ready for life? And let's go back and rejumble the characterizations of our schools into distinguished, on-plan, off-plan, and needs a lot of help. And what we found is over 35% of our schools are in the bottom 2 categories. And again, this is not judgment, this is knowing where we are. But that whole journey of excellence in expectations, of transparency, of making the data available to parents and to schools, and then working to make sure schools know where they are, and then putting together an entire set of action plans in order to close that gap, was the critical function of the last 3 years. Where are we? Where are we going? And how do we close the gap? And I have to say that I have watched the resistance from the established groups who didn't want any of this begin to melt away. Why? Because one, transparency is so important. Data is hard to refute. We have to know where we are. But second of all, this is not a moment of shaming and demeaning. It's a moment then to send resources where they're needed. And so the top of our list was to close the learning loss. Coming out of the pandemic, Virginia had the largest learning loss in 4th grade and 8th grade math and reading in the entire country. I'm going to say that again. The Commonwealth of Virginia, whose schools are truly appropriately lauded, had the largest learning loss in the nation in 4th grade and 8th grade reading and math. We had to go to work. Now, for those of you that don't know Virginia politics, we have divided government. We've always had divided government. We have a General Assembly that's controlled by the Democrats. I'm a Republican governor, and we figure it out. And I went to our leadership in the House and the Senate, and I said, we got to figure this out. And we collectively committed to over $400 million in a program we called All in Virginia. And it was intensive tutoring for 3rd through 8th graders. Because guess what? They had been kindergartners and 5th graders during the pandemic, and they had lost or never gained any of the big building blocks. And we had a massive effort to tackle chronic absenteeism. And all of a sudden, we grabbed an all-of-the-above approach. If there is an intensive tutoring online platform that works, we'll take it. We're going to drive small group tutoring in the mornings, in the evenings, on the weekends. We're going to allow educators to do what they do best, which is teach children. We're also going to embark on getting kids back in the classroom, particularly those that are chronically absent. And what we found very quickly is that the ideas exist. It's just a matter of execution. And so before we knew it, we, as in Virginia, now are one of the top states in the reduction of chronic absenteeism. Kids are back in the classroom. Before we knew it, after a little bit of hesitation, by January 2024, we had the entire state running intensive tutoring. And that is the big step in rebuilding the foundation. And then we went to work to say, hey, let's create multiple pathways for students so they can pursue their passions. And that requires a whole different model of thinking. First choice for parents. And I have to say, I am a huge advocate for empowering parents to choose the educational pathway that is best suited for their child, based on their child's needs. But we also have to go to work to create those pathways and that customized, not one-size-fits-all educational experience in the public school system. And so we've gone to work with lab schools. We've gone to work with career and technical education pathways. We've gone to work to changing block schedules so we don't have time and seat requirements so that students can actually choose the course load that best matches their needs. And yet, we still are one of only 8 states in the nation that has a testing requirement for graduation. And as long as I'm governor, that's going to stay there, because that means that students are ready for graduation and ready for life. And so, Bill, this journey, which you've been such a part of, and thank you, is one of comprehensive transformation about the way we think about education. And again, these are not buzzwords. They are the foundational principles of excellence, of transparency, of accountability, and results. And we have to pursue those with unwavering commitment. Now, the last thing I will say, and I'll go back to you because I've just sucked up the entire time, but is we have to innovate along the way. And if we aren't embracing new ideas, if we're not embracing things that work other places and adopting them quickly and calling them our own, then we are going to be locked into the status quo. And so anybody who works with me knows that I am up for trying it. Let's give it a try and see if it works. And let's have rapid cycle time to see if we are getting results out of that effort. And if we are, then let's populate across the state. And that's exactly what we have done in intensive tutoring. It's where the chronic absenteeism effort started. Candidly, it's where cell phone-free education started, all with an idea that we can change outcomes. Let's run a really tight, focused test. If it works, let's share it across the Commonwealth. I am really excited about where things stand, but I have to tell you, we all know the data. If we don't do dramatic things in order to change the direction of proficiency, mastery of topics in America, we are not going to meet the needs of our children. We are not going to unlock their opportunities. And finally, our nation is not going to thrive.
Thank you, Governor. And just, we had a state board meeting a few weeks ago, and at our lunch, we had 4 of the teachers of the year with us, and they universally, we went around the room and asked them what the most important topic was, and one was the cell phone policy. So thank you for your courage and your leadership on that. Coming from the teachers, they said kids are actually looking at them in the eye, looking at their, engaging with their fellow students, but also talked about the deregulation efforts, and maybe just a minute on what you've done in the Commonwealth across the board, but more importantly on education.
Yes. I just can't emphasize enough the importance of giving students the ability to be students. And cell phone-free education is such a cornerstone of addressing the mental health challenges in our young people, the academic challenges in our young people, and the relational challenges in our young people. And so this was a big step. We issued an executive order last summer, and we gave 1 month of design, 1 month of feedback, and then we issued the final executive order by September 15th. By the time we got to the final executive order, we had over 100 of our school divisions out of 132 that had already adopted cell phone-free education policies. They wanted it. They just needed support to get it done. And then we just codified in our General Assembly session on bipartisan basis the executive order now into state law. I do think there's an important comment here. I was just up in Menlo Park in Silicon Valley yesterday working on recruiting technology and data centers and AI and everything into Virginia, because we are truly the data center capital of the world. And this is not an indictment of technology. It is a recognition that we need to embrace technology in education in a way that focuses on education and removes all the bad stuff. And I have to say, I was just in one of our great high schools that has embraced cell phone education for more than just the last year. And I was there with Secretary Kennedy, and we had about 100 students in front of us. And he said, okay, we're going to take a vote. How many of you would like to get the cell phones back into the school? And out of the roughly 100 children, or 100 kids, 1 raised their hand out of 100. And of course, we asked him, so what would you like? And he said, well, I'm worried that my mom might need to get in touch with me during the day, and she likes to text me on my phone. And one of the teachers immediately jumped in and said, she can call the office and we'll hand you a note. These are really basic things to address. And yet, you can embrace technology in learning while removing all of the distractions, all of the bullying, all of the mental health challenges. And I think we're going to see massive, massive improvements. We've also worked to deregulate. One of the big things that I pushed for was to deregulate everything by 25%. One of the biggest ones that we've been working on is removing state mandates for things like seat time and providing flexibility for our local school divisions to be able to design pathways that can match students' needs. And I have to say, we have a very, very diverse state. Rural areas where agriculture is the biggest economic driver, and other areas where data centers are the biggest economic driver. And they should have the flexibility to design some curriculum that meets their local needs. Critically important, and I think this empowers people at the local level in a way that is most necessary in order to reach excellence.
Governor, it's just a privilege to be part of this wonderful journey that you're on, and just really look to you as the education governor in our country, and especially I think in light of the changes going on in Washington, and looking to the states to be the focal point with parents and their children's education. But just thank you for the opportunity to be part of this with you, but also I don't know if you want to have a final comment here.
Great. Well, I again want to thank everybody for letting me join you. I have said recently to the administration that Virginia's ready. And if you want to shift, which I think you should, full responsibility for educating our children through block grants to the states, we're ready. We're ready to go. We're ready to seek excellence. We're ready to have great transparency. We know how to use that to be accountable for results. And I think Virginia students are going to soar as a result. I invite any of you to help us on some of our bigger challenges. I would love to have faster cycle time on results for children. To take tests in the fall, in the spring, and then get results 6 months or 9 months later doesn't help us. At the speed of light, you can end up in the wrong place. I also want to work to make sure we are identifying earlier in a child's academic journey those things that are most interesting to them, their biggest passion, so that a customized education pathway can be unlocked. And so all of you literally major in these topics. And so we are inviting you, please come to Virginia and help us do a better job with data and with transparency, and as a result, guidance to support families so that our children can, yes, receive that quality education, that excellent education that unlocks opportunity for them. God bless you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in on the live stream. We have a great lunch program, so we'll see you back here at noon.